Good afternoon, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. The date is July the 15th. The day is Thursday. This is the Daily Factor. My name is Faraz Patel, and we are coming to you direct from our studios here in Johannesburg on ITV Networks channel 347 on DSTV. Yes, it's another day of unrest which continues to occur here in South Africa. Now, yesterday, the ruling party of our country, the African National Congress, decided to, after many days of unrest and looting and the burning of many of our infrastructure, to visit these townships. Well, when they visited, they seemed as if they were entering as some sort of a pop band. That just showed how out of touch they are with the very same communities that voted them into power, and a dire strait of the leadership that we are happening in our country. And this is what the topic is going to be today on the Daily Factor: the dire leadership and how they have failed the entire country during this time where we needed them the most to show that leadership and to guide us into the right path. So let me introduce my guests to you. I'd like to welcome MQAPHELI BONONO. He's the Deputy President of Abahlahli Basem Jondolo. Dominic Brown, he's the Economic Justice Program Manager for the AIDC. And Michael Appel, a freelance journalist. Gentlemen, good afternoon, and thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for us.
Thank you.
No, it's an absolute pleasure. MQAPHELI, I'm going to start off with you. What's been prevalent here is that this is all down to how bad our economy has become, and just the informal settlements and how they have suffered during this 27 years of the new democracy of South Africa. And we know that your organization is basically that of pushing for public housing. And this is the crux of it, isn't it, MQAPHELI? That government has really failed to get the people who had suffered so much during apartheid, to get them housing on a human scale.
Thank you very much, and good day to ETV and all the listeners, and also with my colleagues, Comrade Dominic. We would like to also send condolences as a Sheikh Dullah's movement to all people that have lost their lives just because of that they are dying with poverty. We also want to call on to the country, to people to calm down. What we have seen outside, it's over and over, and let us put love for our country and love our cities and save what we have now. Other than that, we will be dying, when we can't have the rules of law. Thank you very much. I think you started very well that from 27 years of democracy in this country, people from informal settlement, people from rural areas are still been suffering from poverty, suffering from inequality, and people that still been taken like they don't even count in this country. As a Sheikh Dullah's movement, we have warned the South African government that it can not be sustained to have so many people that are sitting at home without a job. The unemployment rates that is taking place in this country, it's a result of what we are seeing today. Yes, of course, we might see some elements of politics that are coming through. As Abahlahli, we have analyzed this situation in three parts, especially of the selfishness of some leaders of the ruling party of this country, when they finish looted from the poor people's pocket and the corruption that is taking place, when it's time for them to go, and get prosecuted, and then they get back and use poor people, against for their wrongdoings. We're saying this because the leaders of the ruling party, they have failed people of South Africa. If these people of South Africa, they've actually been counted in the ruling party, actually ANC.
Dominic?
No, we should here in South Africa, we should not sing people that are going to sleep without a bread and butter on the table. But we are seeing that.
Dominic, I want to bring you into the conversation. Dom, it's quite clear. We don't even have to talk about the unemployment statistics in this country. It's there for all to see. And it doesn't even take a rocket scientist to figure out how dire the situation is in this country. This is what the boiling point had to reach. And when you see the looting that's going on, this is just scratching the surface, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. The situation can unravel even further. And I'd like to echo APPEL when he says that we cannot dislocate the situation from the legacy of apartheid and more than 2 decades of failed socioeconomic policies that have left the majority of the people in this country out in the cold and hungry. So I think that's critical to raise this deep structural problems that you say is quite self-evident, and so self-evident that the president was actually forced to admit this, in spite of him not really taking responsibility himself and the African National Congress as the ruling party. Um, and I'm not saying that there's any other party that would be able to deal with these problems. I think that there's a political crisis across parties, but we have seen an ANC who has been in power, which promised a better life for all South Africans, and they very quickly turned their back on the very majority, who, as you said, put the new government into power post apartheid. But I do also want to agree with George that the situation is riddled with complexity. We cannot deny that there are elements of this protest, or I think protest is even a nice, too legitimate a word for some of these actions that are orchestrated, that are planned to sabotage, to break down key infrastructure. We see informal traders and small scale business owners who predominantly come from marginalized groupings have lost their businesses. They've been put on the streets effectively, and the people that they've employed. So this complexity, as much as we understand that the hunger, the desperation, acts as a fuel that exacerbates the kind of unraveling, the unraveling of our social fabric in our communities. We cannot actually condone it because ultimately these actions that we're seeing unfolding, the level of unrest, will be detrimental to the majority of the people in the country. Already we're seeing the prices of bread soaring in places like KZN and Durban. People are having to pay 70 Rand for a loaf of bread when already they don't have any money. So I think we are at a precipice, actually. And the only real surprise is that it's taken so long for such a social implosion to actually manifest in the way that it has done. And I'll finish here because I'm sure Michael's dying to make some contributions. And maybe that's a bad word given how aptly Kapeli has started his input by saying that lives have been lost, and this is devastating. Um, and and the last point I would make is that the we have great concern about the increased militarized response. Um, are there not more peaceful ways in which we can control the situation, protect our communities, and rebuild our communities in a way that puts um, our humanity at the center of it? Thanks very much.
No, Dominica, we're just getting started with this conversation. Michael, I want to bring you in. Michael, over many years of your journalism experience, one I think that stands out, and I know both you and I worked at different media houses when this happened, the 2017 NASREC conference. And the word that was used was unity that was going to bring the ANC together. But it's quite clear, isn't it, Michael? The factions within the ruling party are there for all to see.
Thanks, Faraz. Thanks for having me on, and morning to my two colleagues. There are many who believe that what we're seeing play out in the streets of South Africa is a manifestation of the contestation between the various factions of the ANC. 2017 was supposed to herald in a term we're so tired of now, the new dawn, a time when corruption and accountability was going to be the order of the day. But President Ramaphosa, who is renowned for playing the long game, being a person who seeks consensus before he acts, a tactician of sorts, in many ways, he's waited way too long to be able to act concretely against those within his own party who do nothing but entrench the position that they have found themselves in, which is that they have fallen foul of the law. They have been involved in corruption for decades under the African National Congress. And slowly, very, very slowly, as the wheels of justice begin to turn, you see these different factions. And I'll refer specifically to somebody like the former Premier of the Free State, Ace Magashule, a man facing several charges of corruption, fraud, money laundering. When the time comes to answer to those, we are not going to see very weak kicks of a dying horse. These are people who are literally battling to stay out of prison. What we're seeing here is a manifestation of a grouping who has used the very legitimate pains of the majority of South Africans. If you're between 15 and 24, 64% are unemployed. We have almost zero economic growth in this country. South Africans are starved for accountability from our political elites who say one thing and do another. The culmination of all of this has brought us to a point where Jacob Zuma's incarceration for contempt of court, while it is celebrated as proof that the rule of law is evident in South Africa, the fact that there were mass gatherings at Nkandla prior to the inevitable action, hopefully from the police, that brought us to this point where, even though he once again did not abide by a constitutional court order to hand himself over within 5 days, once again placing the duty then on the police commissioner and the police minister to do the job or themselves be found in contempt, it beggars belief that it just breeds into this narrative that is playing itself out that if you're from a political faction within the ANC, you are guaranteed immunity. The state has been too soft. The ANC has been too soft on acting against their own, sending a stronger message to the majority of South Africans that sort of impunity is not going to be pandered to. But it was.
Gentlemen, we are going to be continuing this conversation after the break. We're just getting started with the topic of leadership and just how it has failed us during the days of unrest. Do stay tuned to the Daily Factor. Welcome back to the Daily Factor. We are, of course, not resuming normal programming because of what is currently happening in our country. We are taking a deeper look at the current unrest that is happening right here and just the times that we are living in and the fear that so many South Africans share with so many of their compatriots during these dark days. Michael, I want to come back to you. Yesterday, when ANC chairperson Gwede Mantashe was touring one of the townships, what was surprising was that he said, and I quote, it is unfair that President Jacob Zuma had to be sentenced to prison time. And I just thought to myself, so what are you basically doing is sort of legitimizing what he has done by being in contempt of court. And that for me just showed that the factions are growing even deeper within this ruling party.
It's unthinkable that a minister within government who holds such a responsibility to count their words before they speak would make a statement like that. A statement like that basically undermines the legitimacy of the courts, the legitimacy of the rule of law that has ruled that Jacob Zuma was in contempt of court, and the threshold, the bar is set much higher because he is the former first citizen of this country. We may disagree on how appropriate a custodial sentence of 15 months was, but to say that he is being treated unfairly, for us, you have to ask yourself the question whether you or I or our two colleagues in this interview, how we would have been treated if we walked out of commission of inquiry investigating corruption. Criminal complaint was laid against the president and against his colleague, Dudu Myeni, for walking out, and there has been very little action from the National Prosecuting Authority or the Hawks to that 8 months later. For a statement to be made like that just shows truly how out of touch these ministers are, and with what contempt they take their responsibilities as supposed leaders in society. These are people that we trust to at least be saying the right things in public. Whether they think differently is besides the point. But at a time like this, when the rule of law needs to stand fast, and we need leaders in society to be calling for calm and for a return to some sense of normalcy, however bad that may be actually for the majority of South Africans, but making irresponsible statements like that. And another statement that blows my mind is Duduzane Zuma in a recorded video saying that those who loot must please do so responsibly. What sort of a country are we living in when people who so many South Africans look up to are saying bizarre and utterly stupid comments like that?
And I want to come to you, Dominic, with regards to that. Role models are meant to be people that we look up to, whether it's a father who's teaching his son, or a king who's teaching his subjects, or any standing member of society. They're supposed to lead by example. My word, we're not being led by example, aren't we, Dominic?
No, and I don't think by either the president, the current president, nor the former. I think if I had to put it in a phrase, I'd say a plague on both their houses. And I think as much as we see the deepening of a factional battles and fractures within the National Party, which we all know is not new, they existed for a long time. I think that there's massive overlap nonetheless in some regard in relation to these fractions or factions. And that is that in the ruling party, the economic policies that we have seen that has created this deep structural crisis that we're facing has been overseen by both the former President Jacob Zuma and intensified under the current regime. I speak to an intensification of budget cuts. We've seen the biggest real cuts to the budget since the post-apartheid transition in February this year. These are massive attacks on the majority of the people in this country. And when we also see how weak I think the current president has been in not being able to address the problem of corruption. And I think this is because the problem is not it's symptomatic of not just a problem of bad apples, a few bad apples, but it's rather, for me and at AIDC, we think it relates to the very macroeconomic policies that have been implemented and the failures of the post-apartheid transition. And if I can unpack this a little bit, I think if we had to try and characterize the nature of the two factions that we see within the ANC at the moment, it relates quite strongly in our minds to a fight over resources and processes of accumulation and different kinds of accumulation that is undertaken by the different factions of capital within the National Party. So it's literally a battle of the elite. And in this battle of the elite, the majority of the people are actually being used as cannon fodder. And of course, I think Michael's correct to say that opportunistically, some of these forces are trying to exploit the deep structural and socioeconomic issues, the deep mass unemployment, the unparalleled levels of inequality, both in terms of income and wealth, the growing hunger, as a means of saying we want to address these issues. But this faction has been in power actually, and they have contributed to the exacerbation of the unemployment crisis, of the crisis of inequality. And alas, we won't see the problem going away, this deep unrest, even if um, we didn't see the arrest of Jacob Zuma for the contempt of court. And that is because of this intensification of these very policies. And so I think this is what puts us at the precipice. As we see greater levels of unrest, as we see people using social tensions as a means of creating greater levels of division and a deepening of the economic crisis, we can anticipate only a greater level of political and social unrest in the coming period. And unfortunately, for most South Africans, the government doesn't have a response, uh, an adequate response to deal with this crisis.
MQAPHELI, I want to come to you, and this is where, of course, it affects the vulnerable people within our society. We've seen videos of, a child being rescued by, a lot of people that I think it was captured by BBC, if I'm not mistaken. And even though there was a sense of unity there, it can't really paper the cracks of the problems that we faced, and especially for the vulnerable people of our society. Just talk to us, MQAPHELI, and you spoke earlier, you spoke to me earlier on before we went on air about how you have had to assist so many people who have suffered so much during this last few days.
Oh, yes, the situation is terrible all over in informal settlement. While I'm speaking now, I just entered here, one of our community in Durban North in Brightdale. Thousands of people are homeless. There was a fire that took place during the day around 12 o'clock. The whole settlement is gone burned to ashes. There were no one to be found from the government to come and assist. We have to run around and see whatever that we can do. As I'm speaking right now, people are still lying outside. The councillor, she just drove past. She didn't even worry and care, and then what is happening in that area. But not only there, the problem that from the informal settlement is that we've been saying this for years, that the leaders of this country, they really failed us, because we have leaders that they don't have love for this country. We have leaders that they only think for themselves and for their families. But when it comes, it's time to get in power for vote. And then you'll see them running in and out in informal settlement, especially seeing, that's why we always say that they take people that they live in informal settlement as a band for vote. And by end of the day, these are people that are very people that they don't have, they refuse collections with all the sickness that has been taking place, the healthy issues. If you go to informal settlement, the president, when the pandemic started, he has announced that people, they must take a social distance, people, they must wash hands all the time. But we have asked the question, how did you expect people to wash their hands when you never been provided the water from those people? How can a human being can live without a water? So we have seen a lot of lessons, especially with the crisis that we are sitting on right now, currently. As Abahlali, we have learned a lot of things. We have seen the state going outside, teaching the poor people the violence when they are trying to build a little bit home for themselves. We have seen all security forces getting together when it comes about, even if they are marching peacefully. But today is like a shocking to us that we are hearing from the news. There is not even resources, to manage the situation that we are sitting on it now. But when it comes to poor people, when they are raising their voices, but everybody that, especially the elites, they get together. That's why we're saying, even the ruling party itself, you will hear them when they talk outside, ANC, it's a government for poor people, for black people, of which they not. What they are doing, they are using the black people. But we are saying today, We are so ashamed that as people that are sitting in informal settlement, we have to die with this poverty. We have to starve. The current situation that has been happened, the most people that are going to be affected, it's us. Dominic just made an example now that right now in KZN, you can't even get a slice of bread. Only those that they can manage to buy, but even if you get it in one corner, you cannot pay under less than 50 rand. Then you get a lot of bread here in Durban right now as we're speaking. But to all that, we're still saying, as a socialist government, can we have the leaders that love this country? Can they come down and start having, discussions with civic organization leaders that are really currently dealing with the situation directly from the ground? Because the problem that they do is to assume, especially even when they do all this budget, is to assume that we need to do this for the people, not to go directly and sit down and talk to the people. That is how now they're going to do it wrong this time around, because they're going to assume and saying, oh, only those people that are living in informal settlement that they were looting, but of which is not. There's a lot of elements that are here in this, what's happening in the country, but we cannot say we can put one side that people are dying with poverty, people are hungry right now, and people, some of them, they are the opportunities that they're using all this criminal act. But all that is going to be thrown on top of that, the people that are poor, people that they must take all the burdens. If you come in Durban right now, there's some areas that we have seen some report what is happening in Phoenix. We're saying that we are all human beings. We're not supposed to be doing that. Let us understand the situation right now. Let us not point fingers to each other. Let us build this society together. Let us not see what language, what color skin that we have. We are all human beings. That's what we are calling for as Abashali, to say, let us get together as a citizen of this country. The government, it's us. It's not those people that are sitting in parliament and making big speeches and come and mislead us. So it's time for us as people of South Africa to make sure that can we get the leaders that will put love for this country and put love to our people that are suffering in this country. As Abashal Basim Jondolo, when I get finished here, we put 5,000 people last year in West Street in Durban to go and demand, the answers with the corruption that it's been happened. Up until today, you don't get answers. That department is pointing finger in each other. And then when it's time for them to get to be prosecuted, and then this is what we get end of the day. But this is disgrace from us. But we think as people of South Africa, we should wake up. We should not see each other and difference. We should see ourselves as human beings, and let's rebuild this country. Let's get the really leaders that they will really take care of everybody that's living in this country.
Well, I hope that
But
can
I was
happen in
gonna say something
MQAPHELI.
on this
Leaders who
quickly,
love our
please.
country. I don't know whether that's going to happen anytime soon, but we hope for that day to happen. Gentlemen, we'll be coming back after this break to continue our conversation. Do stay tuned. Welcome back to the Daily Fact. MQAPHELI, I want to come to you. When the lockdown had started last year, government had obviously gone ahead and, enforced the, strict lockdown regulations, the social distancing. And what was interesting is that, especially in the townships and the informal settlements, social distancing was something that could not be practiced. And what we saw was a heavy hand by the police and the SANDF. And then at that moment, one could see that already this litmus test that was given to government, that already started getting bad marks.
Absolutely, you are 100% correct. We have seen that. And first of all, we were shocked, with all the announcements that were made, that, how each other is to live. And then first of all, we said, as people that we live in informal settlement, we have been thrown like pigs in one corner, even if we try to use a small piece of land that is not being used. And then we are people that we are seen and then been given the name as invaders. And then you will see all these elites getting together, forming a strong force to come and oppress us. We were shocked to hear some regulation that I've mentioned earlier and all that. We were asked that we must wash hands, and we worked on, and we welcome all that, because as Abahlali, we really appreciate the judiciary of this country, because that's the only place that we think we also get some protection on it. Because we have seen when we get attacked from the state, when we our own government, and then that's the only place where we really run, and then we get some protection. But when the pandemic started, we have seen in Abahlali, and we have cried, the whole world, to tell, look, the pandemic was started in South Africa, we are dying, and that all the form of security are right on us. We have tried to work with the Minister of Human Settlement, Minister Sisulu. She even made some announcement, like such Kennedy Road, that they will be giving some piece of land where they were going to separate our houses, but none of that it was being implemented. What we have seen, it was lies. As we always saying this, anything that when they want us to see, like ETV cameras, you will hear them coming, speaking loudly, making these promises about informal settlement. But instead of implementing it and see a progress, that you will never see it. That's only lies. Or when they bring it, you only see when the times they are bringing violence, in informal settlement, in a form of, even if there's time of the job opportunities, when those projects are coming, then people that they don't belong to ruling party, they have a group of people they call them volunteers, that they will be given so-called the opportunities first. And then people again, they'll be continuing suffering. We have seen women of Azania, one of our informal settlement. We were arrested at Wakito police station during the pandemic, when the army and Metro Police, SAPS, even the so-called a private security company that has been hired here in eThekwini municipality, Calvin Family Security, all together going to give those operations from informal settlement. Again, we have seen, ask from the human settlement, can you provide water so we can be able to say we can wash our hands and then we can be safe. Can you come and collect the refuse collection, because the place is not unhealthy? But all that, you'll never see it that happening in informal settlement. What we have seen is those announcements that corruption will come to eThekwini municipality, that the former mayor, how much already that she was being implicated on that case, that there's a money that it was lost, it was made up to, to provide those healthy issues that the informal settlement that are facing. And then again, we don't get shocked when we hear them, some of them coming from the media. We have heard some of the former mayor of eThekwini saying a statement that the ANC comes before South Africa. So that itself tells us that these people, there's something that they don't understand. They don't put those human beings that are living in those informal settlements as a people that also count in this country, as people that are also the part of building the economy of this country. Because people that are living in informal settlement is those people that we find them, they are trading on the street, is those people that are also getting up every day in the morning and getting in the township, in the cities, working hard to build the economy of the cities. And then at the end of the day, when it's time to share the budget and share the resources, they are the ones that have been counted out. And I will say, the pandemic is still outside there. You go in informal settlement, the situation is still the same. There's no refuse collection, there's no water, there's no electricity. How can you expect those people that they must live as everybody else that lives in Sandton or Umhlanga Rocks? Why? What's the difference from those people? But we are not putting that up front, but we are saying that can we deal with the inequality that it's been put in place in this country? Let us all be equal. When it's time for resources, can everybody be given that task? But we know sometimes
MQAPHELI, sorry,
the national government.
I have to go to Dominic. I need to get Dominic and Michael's viewpoints also. Dominic, we've seen over the last few days damage to infrastructure. We've seen jobs being lost. We've seen retail malls, which is part and parcel of us as South Africans, where we like to go do our shopping, even during a pandemic, but most importantly, going to these retail stores to buy our daily goods, your bread, your milk, your sugar, your maize meal, your wheat, whatever the case may be. And we've just seen it being destroyed in a matter of days. This is a sad reality that we face with regards to the looting. And one can only imagine that it's going to take a long time for not just the economy to recover, but for the livelihoods of people who are so used to doing these daily jobs just go like that.
Absolutely. And I would like to add to the point you make, and that is to say that it's not just the looting. I think we must also problematize the excessive buying, what you call this panic buying of goods that leaves grocery stores similarly depleted, and it doesn't allow others to be able to access the goods that they may need when they have nothing. So I think both of these is a massive problem, and it will definitely contribute to the crisis of hunger that we're experiencing in a big way. I wanted to come back to a point that MQAPHELI has raised, and that is about love for South Africans and dealing with a massive crisis of inequality. And I think that I want to make a couple of quick points because I'm guessing we're also running short of time. The one is that we are seeing the military being deployed, but we are not seeing peace monitors, people to observe and assess that where the army is being deployed, that they're not actually escalating violence, they're not taking matters completely into their own hands. We need to ensure that there's peace monitors and peaceful rebuilding of our communities. I think that's critical. And in relation to the deployment of the army, why aren't we ensuring that the army is not deployed to where working class communities are, but rather those key points and guarding those key points without escalating violence? And I think that has to be essential. And lastly, on the deployment of the army, they should only be deployed for as long as necessary. It should not be a, a sustained feature of our current situation. We want more democracy, not less. And we think that violence actually impedes on democratic rights in a big way, whether from the state or from people showing outrage and even orchestrated outrage in the form of some of these violent attacks. So that's the first point I wanted to make. But on the other hand, we cannot just see a militarized response. We have seen the cancellation of the social relief of distress grant in the context where we have more than 11.4 million people unemployed. We need an implementation, well, the return of the SRD in the immediate, and then also the implementation of a basic income grant on a permanent basis going forward. This is one of the ways of alleviating the deep levels of hunger that we're experiencing in the economy. And the people that are facing it, almost 10 million people go hungry each week in the country. How can we live knowing that this is the case? People are also dying from hunger. Then, furthermore, the basic income grant, as important as it is and should be urgently implemented given the crisis that we are facing, it's not enough. We have to rebuild our communities. We have to reclaim public services to ensure that we do have homes, that we do have running water and electricity, not a case where that's only for the privileged few in this country. It should be a case that everyone has their basic needs met. And we don't have to have comrades like MQAPHELI and comrades of his who've lost their homes in this current period because each home is stacked on top of each other. It's made out of materials that are easily flammable. All of these issues compound the crisis that the majority of people in this country are facing. So if we, and then this is where I make the last point, is to say to do all of this, it's critical that we reverse the major budget cuts that we have been seeing over the past few years, but that is intensified in a big way this year. This is pushing us closer and closer to the edge. It's the poor who are going to suffer because of this. And we can see that when there's no political leadership, that it's easy for it to be shown in a mob outrage. Even when we can understand that some of it is because of the hunger and desperation, it's not constructive. We have to figure out ways of channeling our energies in more constructive ways. And I think this is where we do have leadership in a sense. And it's because of organizations, in my mind, like Abatlali Basim John Dolo, the Assembly of the Unemployed People's Movement, movements who are on the ground, who's trying to show and implement social relief, food support for people, protecting solidarity groups and protecting informal traders and small scale business owners, because we know that when these people are attacked, we're effectively attacking ourselves because we are so dependent on these within our communities, and that ultimately they are not going to be rebuilt. The malls are insured, they will be rebuilt, but it's the majority, for us, who are not always able to go to the malls. They are dependent on the small scale traders within their communities, and these are the ones who are uninsured. These are the ones who will never be able to get back on their feet, or at least most of them. So I think if we are serious about a country and a government that actually cares for the people, then then the government and the party that the National Party, ANC, needs to really go back to who it used to be, a party that cared for the people, because now we can see clearly they don't anymore. They only care about themselves, about getting rich and doing anything necessary to get rich. And I think that's how we should understand Dudazane Zuma saying loot responsibly, as crazy and bizarre as it is. So my props actually goes out to MQAPHELI and to all the comrades and activists who are on the ground trying to provide immediate and practical support to all the people who this government and big business, as I have said, have left in the cold, have left in the hungry, without any shelter, and to their own devices. What do we expect then? Of course, people are going to show their anger and their outrage. So we need more Abahlalis to be a bulwark, a counter to the what is potentially very divisive forces that we are seeing proliferating in some parts of the country. And long may they continue doing the excellent work that they do.
Michael, I want to bring you into this. All of this could have been avoided. We started on Monday when President Cyril Ramaphosa gave a speech, and the many that I spoke to, I don't know if the rest of the gentlemen agree, but not many people bought into what he said. And then we had the various ministers in the economic and security cluster coming out. But one stood out for me when the State Security Agency said, and I quote, "We knew about it. But if you knew about it, why didn't you act on it?" This is just sheer incompetence, isn't it, Michael?
Yeah, comments coming out of Ayanda Glodlo a few days ago from that briefing. It's always sort of feigning that they were on top of the situation and saying, well, you wouldn't really understand. Crime intelligence and state security agency works in the shadows, so you shouldn't really worry about what we do or what we don't do in this case. And they mentioned this list of 12 people who are being investigated. Journalists got their hands on who some of these people might be, except you didn't have to be a state security agent or Ayanda Glodlo to look at some of the statements that were being made by those within the Zuma fold, his children in particular, some of the spin-offs. You look at the comments of Cole Niehaus and Andile Lungisa, and you just look at how inflammatory some of these statements are. And some of the statements that were made from the stage at Nkandla gathering prior to his incarceration. And you had to think that any rational state security agency, I mean, the warning bells must have been going off the hook there. But I think they're really treating us as children, saying, well, don't worry, we've been doing our work on the ground. It could have been a lot worse. I shudder to think what could have been a lot worse than this. And if your escape from taking responsibility is to say that things could have been a lot worse, you don't know what we were doing, then you've proven yourself completely unfit for purpose. And if you just look at most South Africans' engagement with the government is at a local government level. And if you look at local government, 27 out of 257 local municipalities got a clean audit. If you look at that as a percentage, that's 10% got a clean audit. Even by South Africa's very low 33% pass rate, government doesn't pass. South Africans need to start asking themselves the questions whether this government run by the ANC is no longer fit for purpose. And if it is fit for purpose, then we shouldn't be surprised by the scenes that we have here, the unemployment rate, the continuing corruption, the erosion of the ability for organs of state, like the State Security Agency, like the Police's Crime Intelligence, to effectively do their work. Under Jacob Zuma's reign as president, them effectively doing their work was not convenient for him and his cronies. Now that we actually need those structures, they're nowhere to be found.
Well, gentlemen, we will be coming back after the break to wrap up our conversation. Do stay tuned to The Daily Factor. We'll be back after this break. Welcome back to The Daily Factor. Gentlemen, I want to get your parting shots to close off the discussion. I'm going to start off with you, Michael. We have potentially local government elections coming. We have the national elections happening in the next 3 years. Through all what we have seen right now and the actions of the ANC, and of course we've seen ANC members go ahead with their regalia and give, especially in many of the townships and the rural areas, the T-shirts and the food parcels. South Africans are not stupid. They're going to wake up and they're going to realize that this isn't enough. We want more. Are the ANC close to them not being in power come the next elections, Michael?
Faraz, you'll forgive me, I missed a bit of the first part of your question, but I can gather from what you're saying from the last part. Look, I think a lot of South Africans, unfortunately, have opted out of our democracy. I did a story a couple of years ago, literally walking around asking people, do they believe in the notion of democracy anymore? And the answer was no. And that was backed up by some research coming out of NGOs in South Africa that the vast majority of South Africans are opting out of democracy. And you can just look at the figures of young South Africans who are no longer interested in voting. The entire system doesn't work for them anymore. They're looking at what is going on in the country where it is not who you are and what your capabilities are, your experience or your competency. It is who do you know within the governing party or within a municipality or a department that guarantees you work. And very often, looking at the digital vibe scandal that's unfolding, that work is subpar and is massively overcharged and overpriced. And I think a lot of South Africans have opted out of the system. The fact that people are taking to the streets. In a functioning democracy, one vents your anger at the polls. I think many South Africans have skipped a step here and are not going to wait for if the October 27 election, the local government elections goes ahead, but have decided to take their frustrations to the streets. Many violent protests I've been at, I've often asked the people when they've burnt down a Tusong center or a creche or a school, why? Why have you chosen to do this? And the answer was because violence and destruction is the only language that the South African government understands, as tragic as that is. Going into the next elections, this must be a point of reflection for the governing party, for the government, to consider whether they are still fit to govern in the light of what is rampaging through our streets, and whether the 200 Rand handed out by Ace Magashule to Agogo, who is of course very grateful, and the t-shirts and the food parcels, is that going to continue to convince South Africans that this is a party that still has their best interests at heart, a better life for all or a better life for some? The facts would prove the latter.
I have to agree with you there, Michael. And Dominic, this is where I bring you into the conversation. 11.4 million. You don't sort of wake up one day or get Harry Houdini to perform some sort of magic trick and all of a sudden 11.4 million people are going to have jobs when you have a system where it only caters for a certain few, where if you are connected within government and the ANC, you're going to get a job. The cracks are huge in the wall, aren't they, Dominic?
Absolutely, Faraz. I want to touch on very quickly, very quickly on Michael's question. I think the ANC will probably win the next elections. They're still extremely hegemonic. And I think that as more people drop out of the system, their overall voter support may decline, but they would still have the majority in my mind. I think the biggest winners, however, are actually populist forces who are keen to rabble rouse, even if it's not sincere. I think I used the very wrong term there, but I mean to try and exploit popular discontent given the levels of hunger and unemployment. And that brings me to the second point and the question that you've asked me. And I would say that we need an entire overhaul of the economy. Of course, it's not just the deep structural problems, as we have pointed out, that is creating this volatility, that we know that there's some really sinister forces at play. Was trying to definitely use the situation to destroy and key institutions and actually a real attack on our democracy, as MQAPHELI has pointed out. So we need an overhaul of an economy. We need an economy that puts people's first, going back to the kind of reconstruction development program that we initiated in 1994, that looks to put redistribution at the center of our economic policy. And here, I think, again, I'll reiterate the need for the implementation of a basic income grant. But more than that, the expansion of public services, providing water, energy, housing, and transport en masse, efficient, affordable, and effective. But then finally, in the medium term, not for very long from now, we need to embark on a reindustrialization program. We need to invest heavily in the rebuilding of the kinds of infrastructure that can meet people's needs while also addressing the massive climate emergency that we are facing and running out of time to address. And then finally, also very, very soon, right now, in fact, we need to ramp up our vaccination program. We need to get unemployed people, people with comorbidities, regardless of what age they are, to vaccination clinics so that they can be. We know the public transport system is in such a mess that many people are actually excluded from this. And we see that more and more people are actually willing to take the vaccine, but are not able to do so. So we need to ramp up that. And that can, all of these four things in the short to medium term can really put our country on a different path, and they can re-show the love, which I think is a very good way that MQAPHELI puts it, the love for the people, and restore freedom and the regaining of democracy, the reclaiming of democracy in the country.
MQAPHELI, I'm going to have you make the final comment. when the dust does settle, and we hope for that to happen, the people in the informal settlements, the citizens of our country, are still going to have the same problem, and that is housing and the lack of it that has not been provided by government. And this is where government needs to step up, because if they don't do it, it's really going to further deepen the crisis of housing that the citizens and the vulnerable citizens of our country are experiencing at the moment.
Oh, yes, of course. While we're wrapping up, there's only one call as Abahlali that we give, that to government, can they allocate a piece of land for people that are living in informal settlement? Not everyone that lives in informal settlement that is waiting for a government house. Some people, they can manage to, to build their own houses, but the problem is that people that are here, the South Africans, they don't have ownership of land, especially in the cities. Our call is that the government today, if they can just give the people a land, people to have an ownership of land, so people, and give enough land so people can be able to build their own houses and be able to plant the garden so they can be able to produce their own food. We have some informal settlement, like a Kenana settlement here in KZN, where our people already, when the pandemic started, they've started a project, a cooperation, the project from plowing the garden, and also started poultry and started, no one is going out for hunting any job. Anyone, even right now, they started a communal kitchen where everyone, they cook, they make sure that no one is going to sleep without food. So our call to government, they can they speedy the process of the land expropriation? Because people of South Africa, they've spoken on that. Even all the political parties in parliament, they have spoken. So that if they do that, we can be able to reduce the poverty. We can be able to reduce people that are going to be a burden from the government, people that can be able to sustain themselves in our communities.
MQAPHELI, Bonono, Dominic Brown, Michael Apple, gentlemen, thank you so much for making the time for us. Please do stay safe, and we hope to see you once again on our program. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for us. And take care to everyone.
Yeah, take care to everyone. I think especially during these times that we are in, we're battling a pandemic, and we are battling what potentially could be food insecurity. We hope that it doesn't reach to that point, but we are at that moment where the fears could just become a reality. Well, let's go to our COVID-19 statistics for the day. And we start off from a national perspective. In South Africa, recording 17,400, just over 17,400 COVID-19 infections. The daily death toll, though, continues to remain high. Unfortunately, 453 people have lost their lives. Let's go to our Muslim community statistics for the day, and another record high was there. 42 new deaths were recorded, with 22 of them coming from Gauteng. May Allah grant the marhum Jannatul Firdaus, inshallah, Ameen, and make it easy on their families. Let us then go to our newspapers, and we do start off with the Citizen front page, and enough is enough. Again, the focus on the looting that is currently happening in our country, and just the state of affairs that we are in at this very moment. And there is something on the left hand side. Chief youngster ready to bloom. Kaizer Chiefs, of course, are going ahead and competing in the CAF Champions League this weekend against Al Ahly, which is managed by a South African in Pitso Mosimane. We go to the back page, and we are going to be focusing on sport, and there it is, ready to bloom, as the Amakosi get ready for the big match against Al Ahly in that CAF Champions League final. The Naturena boys looking for their first star in their African conquest. There is Temba Bavuma. They're getting ready. South Africa 1-0 down in their match against Ireland, in the ODI series against Ireland. They take on the Irish tomorrow in their final one-day international. Well, that's all we have for you here on the Daily Factor. Yes, it is tiring hearing what is currently happening in the country, but we need to hope for the best. Make dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, especially during these 10 days of Zil Hijjah, and we need to hope for the best that can come with regards to our beautiful nation. From the Daily Factor team, myself, Faraz Patel, Tony, Yusuf, Linda, Ellen, and Jesse, we ask you to stay safe and stay in your homes during this level 4 lockdown. And we will see you tomorrow, inshallah, same time, same place. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.